Well, good morning. Thank you all for being here today. I'm really excited about it. As was mentioned a moment ago, it's been a while trying to get this to happen, and it's finally here, and I'm enjoying it a great deal. It's always good to be back in Texas. I was telling everyone last night that I'm a native Texan, and it's always good to get back here for a little while and to see familiar faces, people that I've known through the years, and have those reacquaintances rekindled. Somebody said, it's not a small world, but it is a big family, and I think that's a good way of thinking about it. And so I'm grateful to be able to be here and to meet some of you for the first time as well. We're focusing our talk this morning on motherhood in particular. And so that obviously is going to apply to some of us more than others, but I think will be some things from Scripture that will be helpful to everyone who's here. We also have decided to try to arrange this as much of a class type situation. I'm trying to adapt sermons into classes, which is sometimes a tricky thing to do, but I believe it's going to work for us this morning. I want to take you back as we begin to one of the darkest periods in Israel's history. It was the period of the Judges. You recall that after Joshua had settled the people in the promised land, they were faithful to God for a generation, and then things began to spiral downward, and over this cycle continued in which the people would repent and cry out to God. He would give them a deliverer or a judge who would be a sort of a warrior king of sorts, a warlord, and the people would find some reprieve and deliverance and restoration, only to repeat the cycle over and over again. And as this period of history sort of winds its way down toward the end of Judges, it's just as bleak and again dark a period of time as you can imagine. And even the places where you would hope to find strength and godliness were themselves corrupt and evil. And Eli, though he was a godly man, I think we could say, at least to a great degree, he had a couple of sons who were not, Hophni and Phinehas. Remember the story? Hophni and Phinehas were horrible men, and they were the priests in the house of the Lord at the tabernacle in Shiloh at the time. And so they would steal the sacrifices that people came to offer to God. They would require that the raw meat of the sacrifice be given to them so that they could take whatever they wanted and roast it however they wanted it, rather than following the prescribed method and which God would receive the first portions, and then they could have certain things that were left over from that. But they didn't go with that. And they also, it says, slept with the women who served at the tabernacle. So they were just corrupt in every way that you can imagine. And yet, in the middle of all of that, in the middle of all this dark story, there's a young man who arrives on the scene, and we read about him in 1 Samuel chapter 3 and verse 19, which says, "As Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him, and everything Samuel said proved to be reliable. And all Israel, from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, knew that Samuel was confirmed as a prophet of the Lord." So here was a faithful man of the word in a culture that was far from God and stranded in sin, and in which it seems every influence was for evil. And so the question that comes to my mind as I read that statement about Samuel, here's a reliable person, a trustworthy person, a person who has a real relationship with God and who is characterized by truthfulness and integrity, when everyone around him, because he grew up in the tabernacle complex with Hophni and Phinehas, I suppose, as some kind of role models really for him. And the question is, how do you get someone like Samuel in the context of that kind of corruption and evil? And I think that the answer to that question, how do you get a young man like that in a place like this, is what? What would you say might be one of the answers to that question? He saw the faithfulness of his mother. And I think that's exactly right. You get You get a man like that in a place like this because of the godly influence of his mother, Hannah. Hannah is a very interesting character in this whole story. She was married to a man by the name of Elkanah, however you pronounce these Hebrew words. Someone told me a long time ago, Lawrence, if you'll just pronounce them with confidence, doesn't matter how you pronounce them, nobody else knows, and people will assume you know what you're talking about. Elkanah was her husband, and he was a decent sort of fella. But he had two wives, which, as you know, was not uncommon in the world at that time. And one of them was called Hannah, the hero of our study this morning. And the other was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. So imagine that, if you will. Imagine coming home one day and your husband says, hey, there's someone I'd like you to meet, okay? Imagine being one of your husband's wives. That's as horrible enough to think about. And then you add to that she is having children and you are not having children. And then it gets even worse than that, because in verses 6 and 7 of chapter 1 it says that because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. And this went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. So I don't know exactly what her rival, the other wife, would say to Hannah that would so provoke her, but it's not hard to imagine the little comments that could be made along the way. Hey, could you do the dishes tonight? I'm so tired. I have all these children to take care of, and since you don't have that kind of obligation, could you do this? I don't know if it was more subtle like that or just direct and overt, but in any way, she would be provoked by the things that her rival would say to her. And this apparently became particularly the case whenever they would go up annually to the tabernacle to worship, and it became so bad that she would be unable to eat. Now, I think most women in today's culture would think of childlessness, especially if you're married, and desire to have children as a painful experience. The people that I've known who've dealt with that have described it as an extremely difficult thing. It can be difficult on the marriage, difficult personally to endure. And yet I think that in a tribalistic and ancient culture like theirs, it would have even been much, much worse. Because there was truly a sense in which the nation or the tribe's survival depended upon the women being fruitful and bearing a lot of children. It's an agrarian society, for one thing. If the fields are going to be worked and there's going to be a harvest for us to be able to eat, there's got to be people to work it. And if we are attacked by a rival tribe, then we have to have warriors who are capable of defending the situation. And if that doesn't happen, then it's going to be terrible. In fact, Walter Brueggemann, an Old Testament scholar, in a commentary on this passage, says that barrenness in any ancient text is the effective metaphor of hopelessness. For without children, there was no foreseeable future for yourself, for your family, or for your people. Barrenness meant that there was no human power to invent a future at all. So I think it's interesting because we can obviously see that some of the oppressive attitude of the culture was inappropriate, and certainly the kind of taunting that Peninnah gave to Hannah was out of place. But at the same time, we do need to recognize and remember that we may have forgotten that the future belongs to those who raise up reliable, stable, healthy, courageous, and wise children. And what that means is that even in an advanced and modern culture such as our own, that the hand that rules the cradle, or rocks the cradle, rules the world, right? It means that it is still a significant way that you envision the future, is who is raising up children and what values are being passed along to those children. And are those children growing up to be virtuous? Are they growing up to be courageous? Are they growing up prepared to take the reins of the future and drive it into the direction that it needs to go. And so it remains to be a significantly important role, that of motherhood. And we run the risk of running in the opposite direction of these ancient cultures. If they place too much emphasis on it, we place too little. And I don't have to tell you that there is always in our society a tendency to denigrate motherhood, in particular those who would make motherhood their full-time vocation. But whether from a scriptural point of view or a realistic point of view, it is by no means a insignificant or unimportant role. It is tremendously significant. And so, without being able to fulfill this vocation in her life, Hannah understandably felt very, not only oppressed by her rival, but missed the natural longing for a child, and perhaps felt like she was letting the whole team down in terms of her family and tribe and society. So all of this pressure is weighing down on her. But if we go back to her husband, husbands always have the right answers, right, ladies? They always have a solution to the problem. And Hannah goes to her husband, or her husband recognizes that she's having a really difficult time. And so Elkanah says this to her, "Hannah, why are you weeping?" He notices at this festival that she's extremely upset. "Why are you weeping? And why don't you eat? Why are you so downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons?" Like I said, husbands just always know the right things to say. Well, he's trying, and I think it is interesting to notice that he loves her. The verse here is not the one that mentions that, but he does love her. In fact, there seems to be indication that he actually preferred her to the other wife, but she's grieved because of her barrenness, and he tries to do what he can in his sort of ham-handed male way of helping her think through this. But I want you to think about a couple of things, and we'll try to open this up for some discussion. There seems to be two things. One, by her rival's reaction and the cultural view of the time, and from her husband's statement, that is trying to position Hannah into developing her sense of identity and her self-worth and her value as a human being based on a couple of things that are not bad things in themselves. But what are the two things in this story that seem to be telling Hannah that this is what makes you matter? This is where your value comes from. One would be being a mother, having children. That's what makes you matter. That's how you develop your sense of self and your significance, and it's why your life counts, because you are raising children. And the second one would come from her husband's statement, and what would it be? You're a wife, okay? And I love you, and the fact that you're privileged to be married to me, a guy like me, and that you have my affection, well, you can find your identity and self-worth and wrap it all up in that. Now, are motherhood and being a wife good things, and does that form a part of a person's identity, legitimately so? Yeah, absolutely. But what happens, as the saying goes, when you turn a good thing into a God thing? And isn't that maybe the temptation that she's facing here? That the pressure societally is that it has to be one of these two things, or you're nothing. And I think that when a person begins to form their sense of self and lean to find the glory and meaning in their life solely in these kinds of things, they're setting themselves up, because basically that's what we call an idol. It's what gives us our ultimate sense of purpose and meaning in life. And Hannah's, I think, going to do something that's going to show us that though she values being a wife and she values being a mother, that she values something else even more, and that's her relationship with God. And so what happens next is really fascinating to me, because with these different voices speaking into her about what makes her matter and where she should find her value, we have to ask the question, what's she going to do? And so in the next verse, it says that when they had finished eating, after Elkanah had said these words to her to find her happiness in his affection, once they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. And I found one or two commentators that said that this statement of her standing up, it means a lot more than you get finished eating and what do? Well, you get up from the table and you walk away. That it's much more of a Hebrew sort of metaphor or something standing for symbolically for what we might say she took her stand. After dinner, she put her foot down. She stood up. And she put her foot down and she took her stand. And this is what it looked like for her. She doesn't give in ultimately to the voice of her culture or even the voice of her husband, as well-meaning as he might have been. But instead, she took her stand, and in her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. It's very moving, because you see how intensely emotional this is. But she approaches God with the problem. She turns to the one who alone can provide her with some answers. And she made a vow to God. And she said, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. She's asking God for a son, and she's offering to return the son to God if he should do so. In doing this, where is she placing her ultimate value? Yeah, in God. Because she wants the son, but then she says this thing that would be the most precious and valuable thing to me imaginable, that I would just want to bring in and just love on and take him to his Little League games and get his picture with that Little League uniform on that's just the cutest thing in the world, and do all of these things that would be a part of the normal woman's experience of motherhood all through the years. I'm going to forego all of that and give him back to you. Which seems to me to suggest that Hannah is rooting the core of her identity in her relationship to God and wanting to fulfill a purpose that he would approve of, and not simply that which the culture would approve of. Because even after she has a child, all the other ladies that she's around are going to have their children, and hers isn't going to be present because she has returned him to the Lord, as we'll find out in the story. It says that no razor will ever be used on his head. What's this a reference to? Yeah, the Nazirite vow. And I don't, Curtis may be much more enlightened on this than I am, or some of you as well. I don't know all of the details of what that signified, but it seems like at least part of what's going on with that is that in order to be a priest, you had to be born of the tribe of Levi, right? But it almost seems like you could be grafted into that in some way, become a priest of some sort as a result of taking this vow. You were set apart, at least for sure, and devoted wholly to the Lord. And he will occupy a position much like a priest after Hophni and Phinehas are removed from the situation. So at any rate, he's going to be totally devoted to the Lord. She's making a promise to turn him over to God's service at the tabernacle, which of course, as we're going to find out in a moment, that she will do. Yes.
Like, I don't know that Hannah would have felt that I would have felt like her, okay? But when I feel down and sad, one of the things that gives me courage is a verse that the Lord put in almost word for word 3 times,
Okay.
right next to each other. And that's Psalm 42, 5, 11, and 43, 5. It says, "Why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you disquieted within me? Hope in God, for I will yet praise him for the help of his presence." And that takes me from looking at self to doing what Hannah did, to turn to the Lord. But for God to have put this verse in there 3 times, one right after the other, says, Elaine Jackson, you need to pay attention.
Very good. Thank you for that. Putting God at the center, because that's where he rightly belongs. He is the only one who ultimately we can lean the weight of our life on and not be disappointed. Everything else, if we try to place too much significance on it, is going to come up short, and we're going to end up destroying it, and it's going to end up devouring us. God alone has the glory to fill the glory vacuum that is in all of our hearts. And if we try to make husband or children into our foundational and ultimate sense of self and glory, we're not going to be the best wife or mother that we can be. We're going to devour our children. We're going to consume our husband, and we're going to be disappointed and frustrated in what they have to offer us. We've got to, at our core, find our meaning and satisfaction in God, and then be able to receive his gifts appropriately for what they are, enjoy them for what they are, and use them for the purpose that they serve, without turning them into a substitute for God. Does that make sense? And that's a strong temptation, I think, for women to do, is to make that kind of a substitution. So Hannah, I think, in her actions, wanting the child, but not wanting the child ultimately for herself, but in order that she might serve God's purpose through the child, is, I think, quite heroic. But next, something wonderful happens. In the course of time, she does become pregnant, and she gives birth to the son, names him Samuel, the one who is the light in this dark place. And she says she got him because I asked the Lord for him. Yes.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that I think is similar in our culture is I've met women before, and it's like their whole life is like, I just will be happy when I get married. And then they get married, and it's not fulfilling, and they're like, I'll be happy when I have children. And then they have children, and it's like, okay, that's a whole nother dimension of life and struggles and trials. Or I'm going to be happy when we buy a house, and it's like, it's all, when you talk about idols, and like, this is going to be my fulfillment, and yet it's in God. It's like, okay, I'm going to serve God. I'm going to wait on God, and God's going to bring me gifts that I need or that I'm going to use appropriately.
Yes.
And I think about that for Hannah too, is that she saw, and maybe she was at this place in first. I mean, we're seeing such a small picture of her life, but and so maybe she had been in that place where it's like, if I can just have children, and then maybe she's thought about it and meditated on it, and she's like, what is the purpose? And so for us, I think it's just always like, we need to think about these things and to make sure that God is our center, and that how we can serve him in whatever ways or benefits that he blesses us with.
That's such a wonderful way of putting that. And it seems that she sees motherhood as a way of serving God's purpose, and asked for the child in order to be able to fulfill God's purpose in a big way. And that's exactly what's going to happen with Samuel. I mean, he is a world-changing figure, and with no Samuel, there's no David, and with no Hannah, there's no Samuel. So she sees this appropriately. She sees this as a way of serving God. And also the point that you made about, I'll be happy when. I mean, we all chase that in life, and it's a myth, it's a deception, and if we can't find our contentment in God now, then we won't find it in the next thing or the next person. Wonderful. Well, she receives what she asks for, and then we're told in verse 24, the question is, well, will she be good on her word? And after he was weaned, I looked up a while back when I first put this lesson together, and I think, according to the World Health Organization, for whatever accuracy you get from there, they said that on average, in third world countries, that women typically wean children at about 3 years of age. So probably Samuel would have been at least 3 years old. Some suggest that he might have been a little bit older than that, but he's still a very young child. And she took a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. So she is good on her promise, and when she returns him to the Lord who had given him to her, she said these words, I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord for his whole life. He will be given over to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. So thinking of the blessings and gifts that God gives us as something that we can take and make use of in order to give them back to God and him to receive a return on his investment. That's a wonderful way, I think, of thinking about many blessings in life, but motherhood in particular with our children. We're receiving an endowment, we're receiving a blessing, a gift from God that you have the power to work with, to deal with in such a way that at the appropriate time you can return him and God can get a return on his investment, as it were, from you. Thinking of the parable of the talents, right? You're given something, and what do you return? And I think it's that parable to me is so powerful, because you do have I always forget the amounts. Is it 5, and then I can't remember, it's 3 or 2, and then 1 talent, and each of them makes this return. Both of the first 2 are really excited when they find out that their master has come back, and they can't wait to show him what they've done with what he's given. I think this tells us that they have a positive attitude about their Lord and their master, and they believe that he'll be pleased with what they have to offer. And then the 1 talent man, he's the one who dug it and hid it in the ground, and he did so because of the opinion that he had of who the master was. He didn't think that the master could be pleased, and so he dreads the day of accounting and digs it up and gives him back what he had given in the first place. Well, as we think about parenting, we want to think about, if your child can grow up to be president, then great. You've got a 5 talent situation here, then that's good. Maybe you've got 3, maybe your child's a 1 talent child, and that none of that matters. That's the point of the story. None of that matters. What did God give you? And you may have a 1 talent marriage. You may have a 1 talent child. That's not the issue. The issue is, do you do the best that you can with what you've been given and happily return that to the Lord and do so expecting that he's going to be pleased with what you've done. That's, I think, a good model and framework for thinking about motherhood and being a wife, and how to receive the good, the difficult, all of those things that come from the hand of God, and giving them back in a way that honors him and brings him glory. That's what Hannah does with Samuel. Well, the application that I want to make out of her story is that motherhood is sacrifice, and those of you who are mothers didn't need me to tell you that. Who am I to tell you that? But it truly is, and I know that as a young father, watching my wife Janice with our children, it just absolutely blew me away that anyone could sacrifice that profoundly. It never really dawned on me until I was a front row observer of all that was involved in caring almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for the need of a totally dependent human being, and how she just almost literally turns herself inside out to meet those needs for months on end. I can't imagine. I was listening to a podcast as I was flying down here, and a woman was talking about how she would like to live in a society in which that burden was completely evenly shared between men and women. And I can imagine that if I were a woman, I'd love to live in a society where that were the case too, but I'm not sure that that's going to be one that's going to happen in this world. And I think that there are reasons for that. I think that God has psychologically, hormonally, physically enabled women to make a sacrifice for the life of her child that is staggering to those of us who don't have that level of I think if my wife had passed away and I'd been left with the children, I don't think they would have died. I think I would have been able to keep them alive, but I don't think that I could have ever done for my children what she was able to do. And so motherhood is a sacrifice. Pregnancy itself and infancy require this total dedication to the life of the child, in which you're physically just giving yourself over completely to their needs. They're always right, and their needs trump your own over and over and over again. Then there's from toddlerhood to adulthood, there continues to be a sacrifice, and this is where I want to spend most of our time. This is where the sacrifice has to become intentional as opposed to something that's more a biological and psychological natural tendency. In other words, in the early part of raising children, you are making the sacrifice of losing yourself in the care of the child. But then as they begin to mature and grow, it's a sacrifice of pulling yourself away from, detaching yourself from. And we see Hannah, I think, is the great example of doing that. Mary also in the New Testament, I think, becomes a great example of that as well, as someone who has to have her own heart pierced by the sacrifice of sending her son away to do and bear the burden that he was called to bear. So it's a painful thing in both directions, right? But one of them requires intentionality, whereas the other comes much more naturally. So 3 ways that I think we can think about this second kind of sacrifice is that it is a transition of sorts. I think it's important to remember this as we think about, before we get into those 3 ways to envision this. Motherhood is enjoyable, but enjoyment is not the purpose of motherhood. If we think that that's what it's going to be, then I think we're missing the point. And parenting in general is about preparing the next generation to bear the burden of life as responsible adults. So with that in mind, let's look at 3 ways in which this transition from being everything for your child to beginning to pull away and make the sacrifice of transitioning them into fully functioning adults, independent in the world. The first of these is from indulgence to discipline. From indulgence to discipline. Toddlers are cute, and your toddler is especially cute, right? Never been a cuter one than your toddler. But bad behavior is bad behavior. And it's kind of interesting because sometimes even the bad behavior can have sort of a cute effect. But if left undisciplined, that bad behavior becomes something that you don't enjoy, nobody else in the family enjoys, and ultimately none of the other kids on the playground enjoy either. And so there begins to have to be this place where instead of just indulging the child in all of the things that it wants and meeting its needs immediately, we have to start pulling back and applying a level of discipline to correct behaviors that left unchecked are going to spoil the child and render it unprepared to face the realities of life ahead. Some of the things in this section I've gotten from Jordan Peterson, if you followed any of him, but I love the way he says Don't let them do anything that makes you not like them. You've heard that? Don't let your kid do anything that makes you not like them. Don't let them get away with that. Transition to the sacrifice of lending them to the Lord by dealing with behaviors that make you not like them. Because if you don't like them when they act that way, I'll guarantee you nobody else is going to like them when they act that way. So don't let them do things that make you not like them. Proverbs 22:15, folly is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far away. So we've got to embrace that reality that there is foolishness bound up in my child's nature, and it is my job to get in between the foolishness and the heart and drive the foolishness away. And we do that through a wide range of disciplinary tools that we have at our disposal. But that has to be done. And it may seem cruel to discipline the child, but what's cruel is an undisciplined child. What's cruel is not 15 seconds of pain inflicted on the posterior. It's 15 years of resentment because you have created a situation or left unchecked a situation that has turned a child's character into something that nobody can handle or deal with. That's what's painful. So we have to be willing to make the transition from indulging them in everything that they want and need to the discipline in which they are learning good from evil, right from wrong, and recognizing that they are responsible for making the right choice. Then a second aspect of that is the transition from comfort to courage, What is your impulse as a mother when your child skins its knee and comes running? Yeah, take care of them. Just wrap them up in a mother's love, and it's going to be okay, and put a Band-Aid on it even if you can't tell, where do I need to put the Band-Aid, because I can't actually see that the knee is skint anywhere, but if I'll put the Band-Aid on you if it makes you feel better. That's again the natural impulse, right? And if you continue to treat the child that way on and on and on, what are you ultimately going to get at the end of that process? Yeah, we've all seen that kid, right? Okay. Yes. Very good. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Exactly. Because I think this is also something Jordan Peterson said. You can't always keep them safe, but you can make them strong. And which is better? For you to always be there for your 40-year-old son to make sure that nobody says anything to hurt his feelings, or if something goes wrong at work, you're going to be there to give him emotional ballast and stability, or that he has learned to stand up for himself, to be strong and resilient. Obviously, the answer is very, very clear of what we want, but it requires a sacrifice as we transition from being the mother who comforts all the time. And this isn't to say that you just stop one day being comforting at all, but you have to consciously begin to make this transition. I can't always be there, be strong. And there comes a point where mom needs to say, hey, yeah, I saw you skint your knee. Go rub some dirt on it. Just like Dad would hopefully say. And you need to just, buck up and get back out there and play. And that I think is a really specifically way to deal with this. I've known, I'm thinking of one boy in particular who was just as timid as he could be and afraid of everything. And his parents enrolled him in a jiu-jitsu class. They found the best jiu-jitsu instructor in town, and it was amazing within a 6-month to a year period how this boy began to develop some self-confidence, and he just started carrying himself differently. And instead of being afraid of everything and everyone, he wasn't going around beating people up, but he had gained a sense of self-confidence. Or of a young girl who is just too compliant and wants to please everyone and will never say what's on her mind because it might hurt somebody's feelings, being challenged to not do that, to learn to stand up for herself, to say what she thinks. That has to be encouraged as well. So then the third and final of these is the transition from dependence to independence. And that's, you don't do for them anything that they can do for themselves. Somebody said the goal is that when they graduate from high school, you can give them luggage as a graduation gift. That's what we want. We want them to we want to say, hey, it's been great. We've enjoyed this so much, and we look forward to an ongoing adult relationship with our grown children, but you don't need us anymore. You are on your own. And that's been a huge blessing to us. And I don't mean by this to say that we've done everything right, and we still have one that's at home who's probably presented the biggest challenges of the 4 children that we've had. So I don't want to boast too soon. But with the other 3 children, this was really the case. When they turned 18 and graduated from high school, they moved out of the house, they moved on with their lives, and they have done wonderfully. And we have great relationships with them and enjoy spending time with them when we can, but they don't depend on us. We talk a lot, but they don't call us to ask us about what to do about everything. And to me, that's just a extremely satisfying thing, and it's something to think about it in terms of where we're trying to get, what the goal of this is. And Hannah, I think, grasps that and demonstrates it in a wonderful way. One thing you have to ask yourself is, when you are doing things that keep them dependent on you, is, am I doing this for their benefit, or am I doing this because I really want them to be dependent on me? Because again, if I've kind of made my motherhood my identity and my idol, then I can't imagine who I would be when they turn 18 and get the luggage and go out the door. Then I've lost myself. And so I need them. And you get this codependent situation. You want to create a situation where they have to have you. And that's the old, what psychologists call the devouring mother syndrome. And that's a terrible thing. And Hannah, I think, again, shows us another way that's much, much better than that. Well, Hannah shows us that motherhood is for the glory of God and for the good of the world. And, as we said a moment ago, that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Samuel truly was a world-changing figure. Probably one of those characters in the Bible that doesn't get as much significant notice as he deserves. And without Hannah, there's no Samuel. All right, any comments anyone wants to say before we wrap up? Yes.
You mentioned last night one of the 7 habits that Stephen Covey. One of the ones that I always think about in terms of parenting is begin with the end in mind. So don't think I'm raising this baby, I'm raising this toddler. I'm raising an adult. And so that's your goal of where you get to. That keeps you from being that helicopter mom that controls every little thing and teaches them independence. And the other thing is that you're going to do that differently with males and females, as you mentioned. In our society, we're having trouble finding men who are really men.
You're not kidding. And
women who let them be men, who understand about how to be in subjection, yet at the same time be strong, because we need to be strong. Life is tough.
Yes.
And we need to keep that in mind, and how we're going to raise them differently. And our society's telling us not to. Yes. And so I always kept that in mind with my kids. What are they going to be like in adulthood? How do I get them there? And the other thing is, in beginning with the end in mind, I want them to be godly men and
Yes.
women
Yes.
that serve the Lord. And I think of Luke 2:52 as kind of an outline of what we do. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. Wisdom, teach them how to make wise decision. Stature, that takes care of the physical stuff. We're to take care of them physically and teach them how to live a healthy lifestyle. And favor with God, teach them to fear the Lord and keep his commandments. And then in favor with man, teach them to be people like you talked about that people will like. If they're self-centered, nobody's going to want to be around them. Nobody's going to like to be with them. They're going to have trouble finding somebody to marry. But
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yes.
I had a friend, and she would tell her children, and so this is what I tell mine: is your children aren't going to be happy with you, especially as they get into school and especially into the teenage years. And I will tell them when they're not happy, it's like, look, I'm not trying to make a 13-year-old happy. I'm trying to make a 13-year-old be a good 30-year-old and a responsible 30-year-old. And I really liked that saying, and I liked that they did it, and then I took it from them. And so I think it's important, like, to find people that you see, wow, I like the way you interact with your kids, and to make relationships in that. I also love that you use the word steward, and I don't think we think about being stewards of our children. My children do not belong to me. My children belong to God, and I tell them that all the time, and that I love you, but there is someone who loves you more, and that's my job, is to help you to love them and to know them. And I just love that thought about being a steward, and that's one of the things that I think about, because it is about what kind of person does God want you to be. And in our culture, because people have taken God out of the equation, it is all about me. And so it's like, well, if I'm not happy in this relationship, then you're doing something wrong. Like, it's that other person's fault. And being in this university town and having friends who are professors, like, how many parents call professors at the university level for their kids because they're not happy with their grades, and it's like, wow, what are we doing to our children that they're not strong and independent? But it's because we don't have that focus of God. Like, where are we going, and what am I truly being a steward of God's gifts?
Yes. Excellent. Yeah, that I think those things are so well said. Makes me feel like, why did y'all bring me here? But my parents probably went a little bit, probably more typical of my generation and those older, but we were pretty free range. We were kind of, from the time we were able to ride a bike, we were kind of gone, and we knew what time we were supposed to be home for supper. And other than that, we were out, and probably a little bit of more supervision would have been helpful, because I did find my way into some stuff. But it did create some independence. And I had 3 major concussions before I was 18 years old, and it's probably not all for the best, but I wouldn't trade anything for any of them, because again, just young men who are taught not to be afraid of everything, and to be risk takers, within reason, is an important characteristic. And as you pointed out, I mean, we're losing a generation of young men, especially, who are just as weak as they can be and scared of everything. One of the things that I told my kids that kind of surprised my wife, when they were pretty young, and they would talk about being scared of monsters, I made it a deliberate choice not to tell them, well, there's no such thing as monsters, because I don't like lying to my children. I think there's horrible, ravenous lions that are much worse than physical monsters seeking to devour them. I wanted to teach them how you deal with monsters, how you have faith in Christ, and how you can develop a character that will enable you to go to war with evil and overcome it. And that's what we need to teach young people, is how to be strong, how to fight the good fight, because, as you said, life is tough, life is hard. And I think for Christians in the coming years, it's about to get a lot harder, and we better have some strength of character to be able to deal with it. Yes.
At least something that stood out to me was the fact that there's this other woman who is in her ear constantly comparing herself
Yes.
and constantly bringing her own opinions and feelings and bringing herself up for Hannah's loss or lack. And I feel like it's even more interesting that this person, I would imagine they're all the same. They're in the same house, so to speak. And I think it's really telling because you don't need to go so far in the world to find someone who has an opinion. It's right in your own home. It's in your house. It's your extended family. It's sometimes your church family. It's people who just have an opinion about everything. And I know I have certainly encountered that in my motherhood journey from everybody, especially because I have a child that no one knows what to do with. And not everyone. There are a lot of people who are just like, oh, I could do that better. Why don't you try this? Have you tried this? Maybe you should do this. Oh, if that was my child, like I've gotten the spectrum of opinion as opposed to encouragement, when it's needed. And as opposed to comfort, like there's a whole part of my family I don't even talk to because it's just like, I don't really just know. I don't want to move back to family because all of them have something to say. Just please leave me alone. But I think that it's really telling in that position that Hannah is in. She's just, you don't have to go far for someone to just want to tell you what you should be doing better.
Yeah, I love the way it says that she stood up, she took her
Yeah.
stand, and immediately went to the Lord in prayer, because it can be helpful to get input from other people, but eventually we better get our bearings from our relationship with God and our instruction from Him and His Word to know what we're going to do, because you're right, everybody will tell us all kinds of things, and the expectations that the world has for how to raise a child today are going to influence us in a harmful way. Yes.
Okay, just kind of going off of that, I feel like my advice, I have 3 boys, and I feel like I'm kind of on the end of, we just had our last 3 years ago, and so I have very much gotten lost in the identity of being a mother, and it's like I have to remember who I am sometimes because of just the daily physical demands. It's like I don't want to, but it's just happened. But anyway, I was thinking about that earlier when you were talking. But I try to tell people who are new moms, one thing that just helped me a lot was just have confidence in yourself and have confidence in what you know is best for your child. We've heard a lot of good advice today, a lot of really good things, and some things may work for you and some things may not. God has given you the souls within your home for a reason. And so just take confidence that He knows you know what to do to raise them and to get them to adulthood. Whether it's they need more comfort than other children, or they need to be pushed to independence more than others. Those are things to pray about for wisdom and guidance. And there are so many days I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm tired today, so. But I think that really hits home to me because, what Erica was sharing, we're all in this together. It is so hard being a mother. And there's no reason to make it harder on each other. But, I think if somebody asks you for advice, offer it. But if not, just be encouraging and support them and pray for them, because those are the things that have helped me. The people that have given unsolicited advice are the ones that have hurt me and over the years. So, I think a lot of things we've discussed today are so hard because, you know, you want to think long term, and I want to think at the end, like, these are the goals I have for my sons. And I very much agree with what we've talked about today. I've told my husband this a number of days. Where is National Sons Day? Like, where is National Men's Day? You know, it's like the focus makes me sad sometimes where our country, like, is going with a lot of that. And so you think, how do I raise these boys and to get them into adulthood? But I think a lot of times I just try to focus on the day and what they need for that day and in that moment. And a lot of the things I think we've discussed too are very gradual, you know, like, it's not just
Not all of it.
overnight.
You'll flip a switch.
Yes, and there are so many days I think, when is the independence going to come? But some kids are on a slower track than that with others, and I've come to just try to embrace that and support them how they can. So I share that just, you know, to give people confidence. And you see your child, this is the soul that your God has given you, and he knows that you will pray to him and ask for guidance, and you will know what to do based on what you've read and in his word. And then I think too, you will find the people, like you said earlier, you've seen, like Rachel has been such a support to me because she is so much further than I am down the road, and she has shared so many things with me and modeled so many things to me that are so good. And there are others in this congregation too I could say the same thing about. So it is so important to find those people and hold on to them too. So anyway, those are just some things that were kind of on my mind listening today, and hopefully they're helpful too. But I just wanted to share, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
I think it is, like you said, just gradual. And I think your kids are still little. You want to comfort and love, and you have to build that relationship. And I read a great quote. Robin Elaine sent out a little thing, and it was talking about parenting, and it was like, without relationship, like discipline without a relationship causes rebellion.
Yes.
And I love that. And I don't care if that's in the family, if that's in a congregation. If you don't have relationships, everything falls apart. And so when you have little ones, you do just love them so much, and you comfort them, because one day they are going to go out in the world, and you want them to know that you're there always for them. You've got their back regardless of what happens. And ultimately, we're mimicking what God is for us. He is our anchor and our comfort. So I love that. So yeah, like, even if I say something, it's like, no, they're little. you comfort, you love, and it will come. And like you said, God gave those children to you for a purpose, and that you are their steward.
Just wanted to make a statement on what Jenna said. When my kids were little, and I had one more than she did, somebody asked me what hobbies I had. And my response was, I started crying. Because
Yeah.
about the only thing I did for myself is I got sleep when they did. I did eat, but it was a stressful eating, because mealtime with little ones is not good. And I thought I would never hear an entire sermon.
Yeah.
And I actually can sit now and hold my Bible and listen to a whole sermon. It gets better. And you just train your children to, when you're in church worshiping, when you're taking the Lord's Supper, and it takes a while to do that, teach them that they are to respect the fact that you're worshiping, and teach that independence. And it does get better. They won't be clingy. Your boys may be clingy now, but my son is 42, and he is not clingy anymore. He's independent. So it gets better, and the word endurance is just what comes to my mind. You just have to endure till it gets better. And the other thing, too, is I think sometimes as mothers we're so focused on our children being happy. And to this day, if my kids aren't happy, it's troubling to me. But our job is not to make them happy, it's to make them holy. And keep that in mind. You want them to be holy people.
Happiness lies on the other side of holiness, and to put it in the other direction is to lose both. Yeah. Well, thank y'all so much. It's been a real pleasure to be with you all.
Join us on Sunday as we worship. We'd love to have you, and we hope that you could be benefited by the lessons we provide. Hope to see you then.